Vernomatic Productions.
Are you ready?
Live from the Metal Mayhem Studios in Rochester, New York.
We are gold. We are gold.
And heard around the world by metalheads just like you. This is Metal Mayhem ROC.
Heavy metal music.
Your weekly dose of metal music, interviews, album reviews, news, and more. Want to be part of the show? Send us a message through our website, metalmayhemroc.com, or hit us up on Facebook and Twitter. Search Metal Mayhem ROC.
It's getting nice and heavy.
Now, welcome our hosts, John the Vernomatic Verno.
Good evening, everybody. Hope everyone's doing well, staying safe, staying healthy, and enjoying this November holiday season. Well, tonight we have renowned rock historian, producer, DJ, and author Denny Somach on the show. He's here to talk about the updated version of his 2012 classic Zeppelin book, Get the Let Out, How Led Zeppelin Became the Biggest Band in the World. This is a good one. Tons and tons of cool talking points. Is there a forgotten studio jam with Robert Plant, Tony Iommi, and Geezer Butler out there? There's always been rumors about this Black Zeppelin session. He also shares the Howard Stern obsession with Denny's role in the Stairway to Heaven trial. And could a new Zeppelin live album be on its way sooner rather than later? So that's coming up in just a second. But as always, invite you to get over to metalmayhemroc.com. Sign up for the newsletter to get updates on new podcast episodes, alerts for the YouTube interviews on our channel. Check out the merch store. You know, it's Christmas time right around the corner. We have tons of merchandise. There's hoodies, there's hats, there's phone cases, cool t-shirts, a lot of stuff. So pick something up for your favorite metalhead. And listen, if you dig what we're doing here, subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. Drop us a quick review. It helps others find the show. If you missed some recent episodes, last week we had Marco Mendoza on life as a working musician, Bobby Blitz Ellsworth of Overkill as they celebrated 40 years of their debut. Doro Pesch was here talking about her brand new EP, Warriors of the Sea. And again, if you missed any of these, just get up to metalmayhemroc.com and you can check out all our content up there. All right, Led Zeppelin. Denny Somach and the updated insights from his book, Get the Let Out, How Led Zeppelin Became the Biggest Band in the World. I'm the Vernomatic, and we are Metal Mayhem ROC. Well, today we're talking with longtime rock historian, producer, DJ Denny Somach. He's here to promote the re-release of his 2012 book, Led Zeppelin, Get the Let Out. Denny, welcome to Metal Mayhem ROC. How you doing, man?
Very good. Thank you for having me.
Of course, any chance to talk Led Zeppelin. So get us up to speed. Quick snapshot of your history, what you're about, your involvement in the rock and roll scene, and how you became involved with Led Zeppelin.
Well, like most people, I was in radio, college radio. Then I worked in a small town, Allentown, Pennsylvania. From there, I went to Philadelphia, WYSP, was program director, music director, did every job you can do. And then in 1979, NBC announced they were starting an FM network called The Source. So I submitted some ideas. They asked people to submit ideas, and I ended up getting a lot of my stuff picked up and started working for NBC's Source Network, producing syndicated radio shows. And then from there, I just started doing all sorts of other shows. I had a Beatles show with Scott Muni for 10 years called Ticket to Ride. I produced shows for Westwood One, for United Stations, just about everybody. We became the largest independent producers of syndicated radio. Along the way, I did a few other things. I got involved in some TV projects at MTV, USA Network, and even got involved in working with some artists on some records. I produced a Dave Mason album, a Johnny Winter album, but the big one that I did was a guitar player named Eric Johnson, who had a big Avia Musicom, Cliffs of Dover. I'm the executive producer on that. We won a Grammy. So I've done a little bit of everything. And then I've done merchandising. I became executive vice president of merchandising for EMI Records. And I did all the merchandising for the Beatles anthology series. And then for 3 Rolling Stones tours during the 90s, I handled all that. And along the way, I just did different things. I wrote a book in 1989 based on my Beatles show called Ticket to Ride. And I was just sitting around. I've been producing this Get the Let Out radio show. I thought to myself, you know what? There's been Led Zeppelin books written, but almost none of them were written by anybody, A, was old enough when they started, B, most of them never met any of the members, C, they never saw them play. So I realized I checked all the boxes, and I might as well do the story of Led Zeppelin, but not in a way where others have done it, where they research the history. Because people know, they started out as the Yardbirds, and they've, Jimmy Page and blah, blah, blah. So I wanted to get the story from everybody that was associated with them. So I had great contacts. I went to everybody that ever had any connection, including Jerry Wexler, who signed them. And in this book, I talk about how they got on Atlantic, which I didn't even know myself. Turns out Jerry Wexler, his neighbor, was a guy named Stephen Weiss, who was Led Zeppelin's attorney. And he was out getting his mail one day, and Stephen was out getting his mail, and they lived next to each other. So their mailboxes were next to each other. And Stephen said to Wexler, hey, you know who Jimmy Page is, don't you? And he goes, yeah, of course, the Yardbirds session guy. He goes, well, I'm about to make a deal for his new group. And I was over, I got 2 labels interested. I won't tell you who they are, but I think the guy's really obnoxious. So I don't want to make a deal with him. Would you be interested in him? And Wexler said, yeah, of course. And a few days later, Jimmy Page comes over with his manager to Atlantic, and they signed one of the biggest deals in history, $200,000 advance for the first album. Cost $2,000 to make. Jimmy paid for it himself. And they actually gave him, I think it was, the deal was $130,000 for America, and they needed to make up the rest for the rest of the world. And Wexler went to his WIA in Europe, and they said, nah, we don't want it. And he goes, for $60,000, you can have the rest of the world. Nope, we're passing. So finally he got to somebody, in WIA that said, yeah, okay, we'll take a shot on it. So that's how they got $200,000 for the album. And of course, I don't have to tell you, it exploded. Absolutely. Yeah. Actually, two of my neighbors down here are members of the original Vanilla Fudge. And they were pretty big at the time in 67, 68. And they were going out on tour, and their agent said, look, we want you to take this band. Nobody knows who they are, but they're called Led Zeppelin. We want you to take them on as the opening act. And Carmine said, well, what do they sound like? Send us their record. And Carmine was the first person in the United States to hear the record. And he said, yeah, okay, they sound good. We'll put them on. Oh, and by the way, you need to pay them $750. Carmine said, what do you mean we need to pay the opening act to open for us? Because, well, it's a deal that we cut with the management, and I can't really explain it, but you got to pay them to be on the tour. So they did, and that's how Led Zeppelin got on the Vanilla Fudge tour, and that's when they started to get real good recognition. John Bonham's idol was Carmine Appice. You can tell by the drum setups. He asked Carmine, can you get me a set like that? And Carmine called his drum company and got him the exact same set with the cymbal and all that stuff. So it was sort of like his mentor. And of course, after 3 months, they did a second leg of that tour, and now they were equally billed, Led Zeppelin, Vanilla Fudge. They then did a third leg, and it was Led Zeppelin headlining, Vanilla Fudge opening.
Yeah.
And the third act on the bill, which was originally the second act on the bill, was a band called Spirit.
Let's talk about the 2012 book. Tell us about the book.
Well, I was doing this radio show, which in all over the country now, they have these Get the Let Out segments that a lot of album stations do. I sort of created that, but I created an hour show called Get the Let Out. And that was on for like, I think it's still on, actually. I'm not involved with it anymore, but I produced it, created it, produced it for 10 years. I figured, just like I had done a Beatles book with a guy named Scott Muni, who you might know, very prominent DJ at WNEW FM in New York. He passed away in the early 2000s. I did this weekly Beatles show with him because I looked around and I noticed all these stations were doing Breakfast with the Beatles and this and that. And this was the only country that didn't have a weekly national Beatles show. So I created Ticket to Ride and was on the air for 10 years. And then I noticed, okay, everybody's doing a Get the Let Out. Why there should be a national Get the Let Out show where we have guests come on and, et cetera, et cetera. And that was the genesis of the radio show. And then I'll tell you a crazy story. I was with a friend of mine who was an album artist, very well-known album artist. And we were going to have lunch in New York. And he said to me, listen, I got to make a stop at my publisher's because I'm delivering some artwork. Why don't you meet me at the publisher? It's a big publisher. And I get 10-minute meeting and then we'll go to have lunch. So I go to this meeting and I'm sitting there and he's doing his thing with the executive editor. And he leaves the room to go to the bathroom. And the editor says, so what do you do? I said, well, I produce a lot of radio shows. Right now I'm producing a show on Led Zeppelin called Get the Let Out. So I figured I'd take a shot here. I said, yeah, I'm thinking about doing a book on it. And she was a Led Zeppelin freak. So she says, well, you're going to do that book for us. I said, okay. I hadn't written it. I hadn't even thought of it. She goes, how soon can you get us a proposal? I said, about 2 weeks. And next thing I know, she said, I don't want you to take it anywhere else. We're taking the book. Went home 2 weeks, wrote up the proposal, sent it in. She called me back and said, we're going to put this book out. And I thought to myself, and by the way, if you know anything about book publishing, it is almost impossible to get a book deal without an agent. Okay, it's just very tough. Very few people get book deals. But here I was, I got an agent. Without an agent, I got a book deal. And of course, this was 2009, 2010. The book came out in 2012, right when Celebration Day came out, the Led Zeppelin '02 concert. So couldn't ask for more than that. And then they got the Kennedy Honors, and they were inducted into the Hall of Fame. And it was just like one thing after another, and the book really sort of exploded. But for several years after that, I said, this book needs to be updated. There's so much more info that I've uncovered and nobody else has put. There have been books on Led Zeppelin. And of course, there's like the Hammer of the Gods type books, all the gossip. I didn't want to do a lot of the gossip. If in an interview, somebody wanted to talk about it, that's fine. But I didn't go for that. I wanted to find out things like I became very friendly with the Yardbirds, the original Yardbirds, and Chris Dreja, who was a guitar player, bassist in the band. When the Yardbirds broke up and Jimmy decided he was going to start a new group called the New Yardbirds, he didn't have a singer or a bass player or a drummer. And he asked Terry Reid. You may or may have not heard of Terry Reid. He was an English singer, had a good reputation, but didn't really do too much, especially here in the States. He said, no, I don't want to do it, but I know this guy named Robert Plant. You should go check him out. So Jimmy said, okay, I respect your opinion on singers. So he went with Chris Dreja and Peter Grant, the manager, up to outside of Birmingham, England, to check out this guy named Robert Plant. So they go up, and by the way, the drummer in the band was John Bonham. It's called Weeb's Twiddler, something like that. So Dreja was with them when they were, auditioning, sort of, Plant. And Jimmy said, I don't know, the singer's good. I'm not too sure, but that drummer, he's a must-have. So he eventually, I'm taking the drummer and I'm going to take that singer. He's good. Just didn't blow me away, but I think he's good enough. So that's how they got in the band. And then Chris was originally thinking of being the bass player in the new Yardbirds. Decided, no, my passion's photography. I'm going to move to America and open a photo studio. And actually, he took the picture that's on the back of the first album. That was taken by Chris. So that's one of the stories that I'd never heard. That Jimmy went to check out the singer and said he's okay, but that drummer, man, unbelievable.
Let me ask you, Denny, even in 2012 or 2011, whenever this was, you never heard that story?
No, because they were going to be the new Yardbirds. And everybody knew who the Yardbirds were. They had a lot of hits. Led Zeppelin was going to be a totally different thing. And I mean, obviously, I knew that they had to get some new people, but there's a bunch of people that Jimmy asked to be in the band. Nicky Hopkins was going to play keyboards. And he said, you know who Nicky Hopkins, the session man, is? Plays with the Stones and the Who and everybody. Very famous session piano player. He said, Jimmy offered me the gig as piano player. And I said, are you kidding? You think I want to be in the new Yardbirds? That band's over. They're history. I don't want to do that. I'm joining the Jeff Beck group instead.
Well, saw how that went down.
All these people, and Jimmy asked Steve Marriott of the Small Faces to be the singer. And what happened there was his manager was a guy named Don Arden, who's Sharon Arden's father, Sharon Osbourne. And he was a gangster, but he managed the Small Faces and the Animals and a few other people. And when Jimmy asked Steve Marriott, who would have been great, he was a really great vocalist if you're familiar with the original Small Faces. He was in the Small Faces. Jimmy comes back and he gets a call from Don Arden. And Don says, listen, if you attempt to take Steve Marriott from my band, you're going to have to learn to play guitar with broken fingers. That was the end of that. He wanted the drummer from Procol Harum, I think his name was B.J. Fisher, and he turned him down to go play with Joe Cocker. And he just had, nobody was rushing to be in this band. Nobody wanted to be in the new Yardbirds. So they started out and they had to play as the new Yardbirds because they had dates in Scandinavia that had been booked as the Yardbirds. So Jimmy put the band together, the 4 Led Zeppelin members. They went to Scandinavia as the new Yardbirds. They tried to change their name to Led Zeppelin in the middle of that to try and get a jump on it. And the daughter of Hans von Zeppelin complained and said, if you use this Zeppelin name, I'm going to sue you. So they went back to the new Yardbirds until the Scandinavia tour was over. And when they got back to England, they started playing at the Marquee Club, and they played as Led Zeppelin, formerly the Yardbirds, or they played as the new Yardbirds, soon to be called Led Zeppelin. That's how they started. So a lot of people really didn't know about Led Zeppelin in the beginning. They just knew it was a band that Jimmy was going to start. Jimmy was very well known as a session man. He played on 1,000 sessions. I mean, I learned some of the records that he played on, and I'm blown away. But he put this band together, went in, recorded the album, really unheard of, on his own dime. It took him 10 days to record the record. And that's really the story of it. It's just, nobody in England was paying much attention because they figured, we know who the Yardbirds are. It's going to be the Yardbirds. Who cares? They were not very big, as big in England as they were in the States, because the Yardbirds had a lot of hits in the States: Over, Under, Sideways, Down, For Your Love, Heart Full of Soul, Shapes of Things like that. So they were like, they very rarely played the Yardbirds in England. They just were thought of as a pop band. Whereas in America, they started playing colleges and they became, they had a presence. And that's when Jimmy spotted, hey, America has this thing where they have all these colleges. We could have a band and play colleges. You can't really do that in England. In fact, when I wrote my Beatle book, I didn't realize this, but in England, the biggest place the Beatles ever played was like a 4,000 seat auditorium. There weren't any, you didn't play stadiums. There weren't any. There was no, the Royal Albert Hall holds 3,500. There were no like colleges with big auditoriums, whereas in the States, you could play 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,000 seaters. And that's what Jimmy said. We're going to do that. We're going to get big enough, spend all our time in the States, and just play live. And that's how they built their reputation.
So you released the book. You had the momentum of, like you said, the Kennedy honors.
Yeah.
What led you to live with this book for 10 years to, update it? How was the initial response to the book?
Initial response was great. The book went to number 4 on Amazon. It actually sold out the initial printing. And I went to my publisher and I said, look, this is like a couple of years later. I said, I think we should update the book. And she said to me, well, no, we made money on the original book. It's tough these days. This was getting into the 2015, when bookstores were starting to disappear, et cetera. And every year I would say to her, look, I really think we should update this book. And she said, well, is there really a lot more to tell? And I said, oh, you better believe it. I've heard from so many people about the book that have volunteered stories and I considered myself a Led Zeppelin expert from doing the radio show and from being a huge fan of the Yardbirds. I said, you wouldn't believe some of the stories I've learned. And I'd like to put them in a book because no one's ever covered a lot of these stories. They always write about the debauchery and everything else. In fact, I'll tell you something interesting. The documentary that's out, Becoming Led Zeppelin, have you seen it?
Yes, we've had Bernard on the show.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Had you ever heard of that guy before he made this documentary?
No, but that will lead to some questions leading up. But share your thought.
Okay. Every major filmmaker wanted to do a documentary on Led Zeppelin, as you can imagine, because they knew would be what it came out to be, the biggest music documentary of all time. He's the only guy that went to them and said, look, I want to do a movie on how you became Led Zeppelin, cover the first 2 albums. I don't want to touch anything after the second album, none of the debauchery, none of the hotel rooms, none of the, the mud flap incident and all that stuff. I'm just going to cover the first 2 albums, Becoming Led Zeppelin. He was the only one that presented the pitch that way. And the band said, that's great. That's exactly what we don't want to do anything about anything from the 3rd album on, because that's when it all became Hammer of the Gods. And so this guy agreed to do the documentary just on the first 2 albums.
To take that point even further, because Bernard is a filmmaker.
Yeah.
And it was John Paul Jones and Jimmy Page that were big fans of another project he has.
Right.
And then when they watched that, they fell in love with him as a filmmaker and had trust. They had trust with Bernard.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Seeing that 2025 was a hot button year for Zeppelin because of Becoming Led Zeppelin,
right,
did that help you propel to doing the book again?
I think it may have, but I didn't know at the time when they gave me the go-ahead. They finally said, yeah, I guess, you know what? The title of your book is Get the Lead Out, How Led Zeppelin Became the Biggest Band in the World. And they still are the biggest band in the world. I mean, how many kids you see walking down the street with Led Zeppelin t-shirts? Please. But most of them can't even name the members of the band. Most people have never seen the band live. It's all legend. And they have more teenage fans than just about anybody else. And they have fans my age, your age. It's never ending. It's so vast. So my editor finally said, well, you know what? I've taken it to the board of the book company a couple of times over the past couple of years. Every time you ask me, I'll go again. And I said, and by the way, I hear there's a documentary that's going to be made on them. And she said, all right, well, let me take it and see what they think. And I said to them, they've sold 400 million records, which is, Beatle level. And they did this concert at the O2 Arena charity concert that only holds, I think it holds the O2 Arena I forget what it held, 7,000 or something. And they got 20 million requests for tickets. I said, if I can reach a fraction of the people that applied for tickets for the book, it's going to be a bestseller all over again. He said, well, do you think you could add enough to it? I said, oh, believe me, I could easily do that. I'm just going to take the best of the original book, the best interviews, like with Joe Perry and Alice Cooper and some other people. And I'm going to add all these new interviews with people who had no idea had any connection to Led Zeppelin. And I talked to their producers and Ron Nevison and, of course, Eddie Kramer and the promoters, that, the stories behind what it was like to promote a Led Zeppelin show, things that I didn't really get to ask when I was doing the first book. And obviously they had played Live Aid. They had gotten together 3 times. They played the Atlantic's 40th anniversary with Jason, and they played Live Aid, where I saw them. I saw them at Live Aid. And they were playing this, and the only other time they got together was when they played Jason Bonham's wedding privately. So they were keeping a very low profile, and there were all sorts of stories I'd heard about they were going to reform, and Jimmy was looking to get a new singer. So, I found Steven Tyler's best friend and sort of roadie, and he was telling me the stories of Steven Tyler going up and auditioning, which I had heard, but I didn't know this guy was in the room when Steven Tyler auditioned. So I never had a story like that. That was like, this is unbelievable. And stories like that involving the band in the latter days and all the different people they looked at. And I remember Chris Squire from Yes telling me he was at a concert in England scouting to find somebody to replace John Anderson when he left. And he ran into Jimmy Page, who coincidentally happens to be his neighbor in England. And he said, well, I guess you're here for the same reason I am, trying to find a singer, right? And he said, yeah, he said, Robert won't do it. And, I got to find, just haven't found anybody. So I'm looking around, and there were just so many side stories to that. And Plant just said, I don't need it. I don't need the money. I don't need to do it. I'm not playing Stairway to Heaven every night again. And even in his solo concerts, I think he rarely, if ever, played Stairway to Heaven. He might have done it somewhere, but usually he did some Zeppelin songs, but very few. And he basically was caused a great rift between him and Jimmy, because Jimmy wanted to do it. And they were going to use Jason Bonham. And Robert refused every time. And every time you'd ask Jimmy Page in the press, well, you're getting back together, he'd say, well, you got to ask the singer. It's not my fault. It's like he had wanted to get together all this time. He would get together tomorrow if Robert said so, but,
yeah,
it is what it is.
I have one last question regarding becoming Led Zeppelin. Did Bernard reach out to you while he was doing his research?
I know that he did look at the book, but he did not reach out to me personally. But there's, a couple of reasons. He had the book. He probably didn't know. I mean, he probably could have tracked me down, but he figured the book was considered the definitive story of Led Zeppelin compared to all the histories. So anything he wanted to know, I think he got it right in the movie, and he must have researched a lot of different books.
What's your thought on the documentary?
Oh, I think it's great. I think it's tremendous. Realizing you were restricted to just those first 2 albums, it is tremendous. Now, I happen to hear, don't know if it's true, but you don't mind if I reveal some unknown stories, do you?
Go ahead. We welcome that.
There may be a volume 2. The first one was called Becoming Led Zeppelin. The next one will be called Being Led Zeppelin, and that'll cover the 3rd and 4th album. And then there may be a 3rd part on physical graffiti and beyond. That's just rumor.
Well, we presented that question to Bernard in our interview. We asked him, and read between the lines. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. So it's sort of the same route you're going with that. Yeah. What are you most proud of in the reinsert of the 2012 book that you added to it?
Well, first of all, I'll tell you something. This is amazing. I was up at Sirius Radio one day because a friend of mine was running the Howard Stern channels and some other channels there. And I was up pitching a show to them, to the network, not to Howard. And it was a show called The Cold Cases of Rock, where all these bands had stolen songs of other bands. And I was going to prove which ones were real, which ones weren't. And I was going to have the audience decide who's guilty, who's not, blah, blah, blah. It was based on a show that ESPN did called Does Pete Rose Deserve to Be in the Hall of Fame? Half the people said yes, half the people said no, and they voted on it and ended up, they wanted Pete Rose. Anyway, it's the same idea. But I had so many examples of stolen songs. And Howard had done a show a week before I was up there about Led Zeppelin stealing a lot of their songs. And the whole show was about that. So I'm pitching the show to this guy at Sirius, and Howard comes walking by. And Tim Sabian, the guy who was there, said, "Hey, Howard, you got to hear this. This guy's got a show about Led Zeppelin stealing songs. That's what your show was about the other day." So Howard comes in, and we sort of know each other, but not really well. He goes, and I start going into playing in my little demo. And I said, Led Zeppelin stole every song on the first album except for the opening track, Good Times, Bad Times, and I'm still looking to see. And he was like floored. When I played him The Stairway to Heaven, he went nuts. He goes, "Listen, you got to be on the show. Gary's going to call you next week. I'm going to call you from the air. I'm going to invite you on the show. I want you to come up and talk about this." Okay. So, he calls me like the following week and I'm half asleep. And he goes, "Denny, Howard Stern, listen, I ran into you. I want you to come up on the show, talk about Led Zeppelin because people are, we all these song thefts. I mean, Led Zeppelin's the biggest of all of them. There's Tom Petty, there's, Marvin Gaye, but we want to talk about the Zeppelin songs only." And I said, "Okay, fine." So he schedules a date and I go up there. I figured, hey, I'd be on for 10 minutes or something. And this was in the mid 2000s, right before I was going to do the book. And actually, I did the show with Howard. I ended up being on the air for an hour with him because I started playing the samples of songs, the Led Zeppelin song, and where it was stolen from. And his audience was going crazy. When I played the Stairway to Heaven Taurus, which is the Spirit song they stole it from, which is on this first Spirit album, guy calls up and he goes, "Oh, Howard, this is terrible. Stairway to Heaven was the song of my wedding. Does that mean my wedding's not legal?" I mean, people were nuts. And Howard was going crazy. The phones, they got 400,000 calls. And I didn't realize it at the time, but his show would repeat every 4 hours because of the time zones. So every 4 hours when it would repeat, the phones would explode. So I get a call back from Sirius and Tim, and he goes, "Listen, we want to do your show." I said, "Okay." And they said, "Listen, it would take us a while to do a contract. Just, what do you want to do?" I said, "Well, I want to do an hour about explaining all the clues. I have 12 cases to start with. And then the following week, we'll talk about it and the audience will decide, did they or didn't they steal it?" So I started lining up. He said, "Well, listen, use our studios, do whatever you want. It's going to take me a couple weeks to get a contract, but you got a deal." So I start working on the show and I start tracking down all these guys whose songs were stolen. There's a guy named Jake Holmes who wrote what became Dazed and Confused. In fact, he wrote a song called I'm Confused. And he opened for the Yardbirds in 1967 at the Village Theater in New York, which later became the Fillmore. And he did this song called I'm Confused. And Jim McCarty of the Yardbirds and Jimmy, after the show, The next day, they went down to Bleecker Bob's, which is the big record store in the village, and bought a copy of Jake Holmes's album so they could learn the song. Because Jimmy said, boy, we could take this song and really do something with it. So they took it. Of course, they did it a little bit differently. So I tracked down Jake Holmes. And actually, enough people had heard me on Howard's show talking about it that he said, wow, this is amazing. Everybody and his brother's been calling me, telling me about Led Zeppelin stealing my song. So I want you to come into Sirius. I want to do an interview because we're doing this show, blah, blah, blah. And he comes in, and he's not really in the music business anymore. He stopped in the early 70s, and he's one of the most famous jingle writers. He wrote I'm a Pepper, You're a Pepper, the Dr. Pepper theme, and he wrote the Be All You Can Be, the Army theme. So he wasn't aware of the music business. He didn't know the song had been stolen. And when I told him, he said, I've heard things like that, but I never really listened to, I'm not in the music business. So I played him the song and he goes, God damn it, I got to get a lawyer. So he gets the lawyer and he sues him and he obviously, wins. They had to make a settlement. You'll notice the credits have changed on just about every song on that first album to different names. So they agreed to put Jimmy Page with influences by Jake Holmes, and he's able to, you can only collect going back 3 years and then going forward as credit. Then I called, I knew that Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You had been considered a folk song that Jimmy had found on a Joan Baez album. When he first met with Robert, he played it to him. He says, I want to do this song. It's got light and shade and blah, 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 blah. But he says, I'm not sure who wrote it. He says, I think Joan Baez did. She's got it listed as traditional. So we're going to take it and we're going to put our names on it and make it our song. So I found the woman, her name was, I think it was Ann Briggs, who actually wrote the song in the mid-50s. And what happened was she had a 15-year-old son. She played guitar. She does, as a hobby. And one day the kid is in the house and his mom's playing the song she wrote called Babe, I'm Gonna Leave. And the kid goes, Mom, why are you playing a Led Zeppelin song? And she said, Led Zeppelin song? What are you talking about? I wrote that song. So she sued and she won.
Did you ever hear from the Zeppelin camp, either with the book or any of this? Like, hey, who's this guy digging up all this dirt?
No, but nobody cared. I'll tell you why. I even told the chairman of Atlantic, I said, I'm a little hesitant to tell you about this book that I'm doing because, I'm the one that brought up all the clues, how Led Zeppelin stole these songs. He said, nobody cares. Everybody knows they stole all their songs. Their manager used to tell them, somebody's going to sue you? Fuck them. What are they going to do? Sue us? It's too expensive to sue. So nobody sued. And he said, just put your name on it. Who cares? So then I played, Taurus, and I told the story of Spirit and how Spirit had been the middle act in the first Zeppelin tour, and how Zeppelin were big Spirit fans. If you notice on their, I think it's live at the BBC, they actually do covers of two Spirit songs. They do a cover of, I can't remember, Go Fresh Garbage, and some other, they were huge Spirit fans. So Spirit was an influence on them. So after doing the Stern show, I get a call from this attorney. And he goes, listen, are you the guy that was on Stern that did all this Zeppelin stuff? And I said, yeah, why? He goes, I'm representing the estate of Randy California, who was the guy who wrote Taurus from Spirit. We're going to sue Led Zeppelin for thievery on Stairway to Heaven. And he goes, the only reason they're going to do it is because I offered to do it on contingency. But if I prove this, it's going to be historical. It's the biggest, court case of the 21st century, musically speaking. So the first thing he did was he said, I want to hire you as an expert witness. I said, fine, I'll be an expert witness in the case. And then I'm starting to go, Jesus, I'm thinking, what's Led Zeppelin going to do? I mean, everybody says they stole all their songs. They know they stole them. So, and then I asked the lawyer, I said, how did you get this case? And he goes, well, you know Mark Andes? And I said, Mark Andes, yeah, he was in Firefall, the band Firefall, but he was also the bass player in Spirit. He's the only living member of Spirit. The rest are all dead. So he joined the estate of Randy California in the soup because they needed as much heft as they could get. So I call and interview Mark Andes. And I tell him, he said, you're the guy. He said, somebody played me an air check of you on Howard Stern. And he said, I couldn't believe it. You're the guy that realized that we all knew he stole that from Randy. So he goes on and on and on and on. And he's never spoken about it anywhere. I interviewed him. It's in the book. Nobody from that case on the other side has ever publicly spoken. But Mark Andes tells the whole story about what happened. He was in Firefall after he was in Spirit. Then he was in a band called JoJo Gunn, which had one hit. And then Firefall, which maybe you remember, they were sort of like an Eagles band. And then for 10 years, he was the guitar player in Heart. And what happened was he got fired from Heart after 10 years. And when Heart got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, they were using pictures of the band. He wasn't, but the band was, the two girls, and they were using pictures of Heart with him in it. And he was pissed. So he contacted a lawyer and said, I want you to sue the Hall of Fame. They're using my picture, name and likeness. And I'm not being inducted. He was really pissed. So the guy said, okay, I'll take this. I'll handle this for you on contingency. He said, but there's a reason I'm going to do it. And he got the Hall of Fame to change the pictures and blah, blah, blah. And he said, now what I really want is I want the Stairway to Heaven case. And that's how he got it. Now, this is in the book. I don't know how many people realize this, but have you ever heard the comparisons between the two songs? Okay.
Yeah.
Dead on.
And it's
dead on.
pretty damn close.
So here's what happened. They go to trial, right down to the end, and Led Zeppelin wins the case. This guy, representing the estate of Randy California, appeals. And he tells the judge, look, all you have to do is play the two songs side by side. The jury's going to know. Just play 20 seconds, side by side, in the courtroom. The judge goes, I can't do that. I go, what do you mean you can't do that? That's how they're going to know. He goes, well, unfortunately, the songs were copywritten via folio, which means they were written down. Now, I'll give the jury a copy of the folios. And I said, do you think any jury is going to look at music sheets and know that it sounds alike? He goes, I can't, you can't play the tape. It wasn't copywritten that way. And that's how the appeal didn't get overturned because of that.
Denny, I'm confused. What is folio? Why couldn't they play the audio
a
comparison?
folio is the song written out. It's what you go to the music store and you buy, a song. That's a folio.
Yeah.
So the song, Jimmy wrote the song by hand. He didn't, he might have put music notes on it, but he didn't copyright it with a recording or a demo, which is what a lot of people do because they were so well known. They didn't need to do demos. He would write songs and have them copied. So nobody knew that the two songs were the same at the intro because they didn't hear it. And, like I said, if you did hear it, that absolutely it's true. And he started telling me about how they had met Zeppelin in England. They actually played pool with them. Zeppelin guys told them what big fans of Spirit they were. All the other things were there. So there was no question, but unfortunately, that's the way it got ruled. But I got to Mark Andes and he agreed. He said, I've never spoken about this to anybody. I'll give you an interview for the book. And he's in the book talking about the case and the same thing I just told you, why it didn't go any further. Because they thought they really had a shot when it went to appeal.
Yeah. A couple other interviews. You had Geezer Butler of Sabbath in there talking about this alleged session where Zeppelin and Sabbath.
I didn't know anything about that supposed, Black Zeppelin. Geezer told me about it. And I said, I've never heard that. Now, there are some Black Sabbath fans that claim that they heard rumors. And that Tony Iommi said, yeah, we did the jam, but I told the engineer not to record it. But obviously that doesn't mean anything in the music business. People record everything. So no one's found it.
Yeah, no, I've heard that. I've heard that rumor for years. I'm a Sabbath fan. I've heard that for years.
And he believes that at some point it may surface on YouTube or something, but so far none of it has surfaced anywhere. So nobody can prove it or disprove it. But it, from the guys remember the session. It wasn't the whole band. It was Plant and Bonham and Iommi and Geezer that jammed for an hour and played a bunch of songs.
Maybe with Bernard McMahon's luck on any of these alleged follow-ups, maybe, someone will find this tape.
But I'm sure Jimmy Page would not allow it to be used. He's not on it.
No. So the book comes out today, the 28th.
Comes out today officially. You can get it through Amazon. You'll get it in 2 days. It'll be in the stores, Barnes & Noble and all the regular stores. It's Hachette is the publisher. They're the third largest book company in the world. So it'll be everywhere. But the cheapest place and the fastest place is to go to Amazon and make sure they might have a copy of the earlier one. I think there's one copy comes up, but just go there. Or you go to my website, which is rockandrollforgrownups.com.
Are we going to see an updated 2030 version? Is this a continuing franchise?
If I find something or something changes, it's possible, but I don't know. I covered just about everything there ever was that was ever asked about the band. The thing at the hotel in Seattle with the mud shark and all that stuff's in here. So there's almost nothing to really know. I mean, I have Bob Geldof talking about what he had to do to get Zeppelin to play Live Aid because Jimmy didn't want to do it. And Led Zeppelin, in case you didn't know, is when the videotape came out, the DVD, they're the only band that's not on there because Jimmy said, I thought Phil Collins ruined it for us. I don't like the way it sounded. I'm not going to go in and add anything because nobody else did. So I don't want it on the DVD. And Geldof said, well, everybody's on. He goes, no, I don't want it, but I'll tell you what, all of the royalties that we get on this other video that we're putting out next year, I'll donate to Band-Aid.
Denny, anything else you could promote? What else are you doing?
Well, I have a new radio show. I have a podcast also. It's called The Rock Podcast. We've been on for 5 years, and we do interviews with people. And I'm just starting a new radio show called Rock and Roll for Grownups. And what it is all the songs from the late 60s, 70s, and 80s, classic rock, that you don't hear much on the radio anymore because classic rock's now moved up to the 90s. So you don't hear a lot of songs. I mean, you wouldn't hear Spirit on the radio today. They had a hit, I Got a Line on You. And, Eric Clapton has written 700 songs. The only two you hear on radio are I Shot the Sheriff and Layla. What about the other 698 songs? Dire Straits, he's written 300 songs. All you ever hear is Money for Nothing. So these songs are sort of like lost. So I'm finding all the music that nobody plays that was relevant and is relevant today, especially to classic rock people, and I'm putting it into a format. And it's primarily late 60s, 70s, and 80s. I mean, the Beatles, the only Beatles song you hear on the radio is Hey Jude. The only John Lennon song you ever hear is Imagine. When's the last time you heard any other song?
Well, yeah, there's a market there, Denny. There's a market,
And that's when music was great. The classic rock, you can't beat. I remember taking my son when he was 12 years old to see Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And I said to him, now watch this keyboard player because this guy is a real musician. Not like some of these bands that are disposable. I mean, this guy's going to blow you away. And of course, Keith Emerson is one of the greatest keyboard players of all time. And we don't get to see that now because these bands aren't really playing anymore. And too many of them are what I call disposable. They're here, a couple of hits, they disappear. You never hear from them. I mean, when's the last time you heard Flock of Seagulls on the radio? Okay. So I found a hole where people love these songs. They don't hear them anymore. Instead of hearing, you still hear Smoke on the Water by Deep Purple, but you don't hear anything else by Deep Purple. They have a lot of great songs. You hear Aqualung by Jethro Tull. Jethro Tull has hundreds of great songs. You never hear them. There's no place for them to fit. They don't fit in the 400 songs that radio formats play now. The only way to hear this stuff is on satellite radio or on, Spotify or whatever. But if you're an average listener, you're not going to hear it on radio. So I'm launching that. I've been doing it as a test. A friend of mine activated New HD, which is, you can get it through an app. It's based on the old format of WNEW-FM in New York, which was the greatest classic rock station before, when Scott Meany was there and all the other people. And he was able to get permission to use New HD. So he asked me to do a weekly show on this app. And that's where I'm now doing Rock and Roll for Grown-Ups. So if you want to hear the shows, go to newhd.com and you can see all the episodes of the shows. I'm working on getting it, out there to other terrestrial stations or maybe a platform. But that's the two things that I'm working on. I have one of the largest interview libraries of classic rock artists in the world because of all the syndicated shows that I did. And I saved everything. So what's happening now, started a couple of years ago, I'm getting calls from people that are doing these documentaries. And very few people want to be interviewed as they look today in these documentaries, if you notice, like Laurel Canyon and that kind of stuff. But they need the sound. So I'm licensing audio from my library to documentaries. So far, I did Laurel Canyon. I did Mr. A and Mr. M, the story of A&M Records. I had an interview with the Supertramp. I did the Rolling Stones did a 4-part series, and I had the only video interview actually, of Jagger and the Stones from the 80s, because they weren't talking to each other then. There aren't any interviews except mine.
Yeah, I saw that one. In show research, I watched that one. It was 1982, was it?
Yeah, and it's a great interview, but no one else talked to the Stones. They wouldn't talk to anybody.
That's awesome, man.
I contributed to the John Waite documentary. I forget what it was called. Every Time I Think of You or something like that. Then the kicker was I get a call from Mary McCartney, Paul's daughter, and she's doing a documentary on If These Walls Could Sing, the story of Abbey Road. And she wants to license some audio of George Martin, which of course I have plenty of. So I'm now, and I licensed some stuff to some filmmaker in France who was doing AC/DC. So nobody really knows about me. They find me. But I'm looking for a way to let people know, hey, I got all this audio and video and it's licensable. But as of right now, people are finding me, and that I'm licensing a lot of my stuff to documentaries.
How exciting, man.
I'm happy to do, because this thing is, these documentaries are great.
Yeah, it's your passion. It's your life's work. That's awesome, man. Right. Digital age is coming through for you. So the book, Get the Lead Out, 2025 edition. Go to Amazon.
Go to my website, Rock and Roll for Grown-Ups. That's rock and the letter N, roll, the number 4, grownups.com. Just so you know. Oh, I will leave you with a story that nobody's heard. Now, there's nothing in stone, but as I was perusing, and I talked to a lot of people up at Atlantic Records and a lot of people close to the band, everyone keeps saying, well, are there any Zeppelin albums still in the can? Is anything else going to come? Because I said to the chairman, I said, are you going to put a soundtrack out from this Zeppelin thing? He goes, no. I said, well, is there any Zeppelin material that you're going to put out? He goes, well, there really isn't any unreleased stuff. We've already put it all out. However, there is a discussion going on about starting to put out board tapes like Springsteen does. Mm-hmm. Board tapes, because they taped every show from the soundboard. And those tapes, They can clean them up nowadays to sound like great live albums. So he said, there's a lot of has to be worked out, but he said it's being discussed. So you may see a couple of new live Zeppelin albums in the next year or so.
All right. From the man himself.
Breaking news.
All right. Denny, thanks, man.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it very much.
You're welcome. And listeners, remember, get up to metalmayhemroc.com website, sign up for our newsletter, join our community, and check out our brand. For my guest, Denny Somach, I'm the Vernomatic, and we'll talk to you soon.
Metal for life.
Thank you for listening to Metal Mayhem ROC. Check out our website at metalmayhemroc.com for information on podcasts, archives, links to all our live radio shows, and all sorts of info. Please like, follow, and share with everyone, even your non-metal friends. And always remember to keep it heavy.